Hello and welcome back to another exciting edition of Light Beer, Dark Money. I am your humble host, Christopher Clements. And again, my co-host, Sean Noble, is unable to be with us today. He's on assignment in the depths of our nation's capital, probably hanging out with our new speaker, I would imagine. You know, funneling him some dark money, perhaps. Making sure that all the dark money needs to go to Speaker Johnson now that has been decided. But we're going to get to that topic here, but also some very important topics with a frequent visitor to the Light Beer Dark Money Roundtable, and that's our good friend John David Desser of Virginia. John, my old friend, brother, godfather to my children. How are you?
Good to see you. Yeah, we're doing great. Thank you. It's a beautiful fall day in Virginia.
Yeah, what's the temperature like there?
I think it's going to hit 70 today, and it's just, the trees are changing color. It's just gorgeous.
It's a balmy 83 today, and there's a bit of a crisp, feeling in the air that perhaps 100 degrees are no longer in our future.
Yeah, well, we have the crisp already, and it's just been a gorgeous couple of days here. This is my favorite time of year in the DC area.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Leaves change color and the summer, humidity is gone and there's a little crispness in the air. It's just awesome.
You got to go find your jackets.
Yep, and sweaters.
Packed away in the attic somewhere, because you have attics in Virginia and you have basements in Virginia, places to store things. We don't have those here in Arizona. That's unfortunately. Right. And you have fall foliage. We have to actually travel north to find foliage. Or like I did last week, I was in New Hampshire for like 4 or 5 days, and they were crossing the end of their fall foliage.
The saguaro needles don't change colors, do they?
No. And then you finally have the dreaded when the mesquites finally lose their leaves, like, in January when you have a big rain or a big wind. Then it just gets kind of dismal. But hey, we're not here to talk about the weather per se. How are things in Washington? You guys, there's not been a lot going on in Washington lately, has there?
Well, there has been, but it's mostly been internal in the House Republican Conference meetings, and they've been, just scrambling for the last couple of weeks to try to figure out who their speaker is going to be. And all the ups and downs and machinations, and I'm running, and then I'm withdrawing, and then my competitor is not endorsing me, but I thought he was going to endorse me, and that just kept going on for day after day, and finally, I think, and I didn't know how long it was going to last. Honestly, I wasn't sure they would get it done this week, but finally, I think they came to their senses and realized this is not a good look for us. It looks like we don't know how to govern. And we just got to pick the best person that we can and get on and all get on the same team, because this is starting to get ridiculous. And they picked a guy who I don't know well. I've met him. He has a reputation of just being a good person. I think both sides of the conference like him. The we need to govern side versus the more MAGA side. They both like him. They both think he's one of theirs.
Yeah.
And the truth is he probably is both of theirs. He's a good governing type of guy, and is my impression, as well as, very conservative. And so we'll see. But finally we have a speaker in place.
Well, and also he's incredibly, he's an attorney. He's been very active in conservative evangelical circles for several years. Yep. Even doing some things for the Southern Baptist Convention. And I was listening to Al Mohler's podcast this morning, and he was singing his praises. So, and the point that Al made, which was really interesting, is that he's a nice guy. People like him. Which goes back to the old adage in politics, like, nice sometimes wins. People have to like you to want to elect you. And that was probably the biggest problem. I mean, both with the downfall of Kevin McCarthy and then the downfall of the other two candidates is likability.
Yeah, likability has always been an issue in politics. Remember the old political test. Who would you rather have a beer with? Well,
The
I don't
beer
know.
test is a
I
big,
don't know.
big
Yeah, I don't
part.
know if Mike drinks light beer or dark beer or no beer, but I did have one interaction with him a couple of years ago. As you may know, I was volunteering to help with parents who concerned about content in their films that they stream at home, and there was some technology that allowed you to delete um, offensive scenes or language. VidAngel is the name of that technology. It still exists, actually. And there was a need to potentially clarify in legislation that was permitted. And he was very eager to lead that effort. It turned out the company was sold and is able to work under the current construct of the law, and they didn't need a clarification. But he wanted to jump right on that, and so that was my only one interaction with him.
Has he been involved at all in the prayer breakfast?
I actually don't know. I didn't ask anybody. I know that, one of my good friends is Kathy McMorris Rogers. She's a very strong believer. She's chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. She's the one that nominated him, and they're very close. And I think he does participate in a Bible study that she also participates in. That might be the House prayer group that meets on Thursday mornings. But I didn't ask the people who lead that if that's the case. I just saw that in the press.
Well, if he hasn't been that active in the past, he's probably going to be pretty active now. I would imagine.
Yeah, well, anybody in that job needs prayer. So
yeah, for sure. Well, and they showed some of that yesterday, that there was a group of members that surrounded him on the House floor and prayed with him.
Is that right? I didn't see that.
Yeah, they posted a picture, and the left lost their minds, completely lost their minds on that. So, I mean, it's encouraging, because the last several weeks has just been a complete joke in my mind. I mean, beginning with the upheaval around Kevin McCarthy, led by Matt Gaetz, and his own issues, his own ethics. And I'm wondering, do you think there seems to be, I've reached out to a couple of our congressmen here that they won't really respond to this question, but do you think there'll be an effort to remove Gaetz from the conference?
I haven't heard that. That doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm a Republican, registered Republican. I've been a registered Republican my whole voting life. Actually, even before I was a voting age, you and I helped start a Young Republicans Club in high school, if you remember that.
I do remember that. And there was 10 of us, I think,
in
the entire school.
And it was a great way
and we were mocked and protested against, I believe.
Well, it was a great way to agitate the faculty, who were all very left. But it wouldn't bother me, put it that way. I'm one of the Republicans that's annoyed with what Matt Gaetz did. I don't think it was heroic at all. I think he's a troublemaker, and I have yet to see him come forward with any creative and good ideas that can actually become law. And that's what you're supposed to do as a lawmaker. You're not supposed to just be a bomb thrower. And so I'm one of the Republicans who's not a fan, and it wouldn't bother me if he were removed. But I also believe in the rule of law and the law, the way the laws are structured today. It's up to the people in his district to decide if they want to send him back. I would be a little bit reluctant to kick him out of Congress, but I'd probably vote against his primary opponent if I lived in his district.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking, just the conference itself, just marginalize him to where he's just almost silent. But that's up to them. And there might be this comedy right now. There's this idea that, we have to move forward and let bygones be bygones. And the 8 members who blew up this entire House, along with, every single Democrat, let's not forget that they partnered with every single Democrat to remove Kevin McCarthy. We should give them a pass. And then included 2 of our congressmen, Andy Biggs and Eli Crane.
Yeah. I don't know those guys, but I did notice they were on that side of it throughout this whole thing.
Well, Andy's been on the show. He's a friend of the show. We like Andy a lot, but and he was pretty clear about his about his objections to Kevin McCarthy as Speaker from the beginning. Had several concerns that he relayed on the show, but to remove him in the way that it was done, I think just without a plan, without any sort of
Without a plan.
alternative.
That was the big problem. I agree.
It was when you get into the personal animus towards somebody else within politics, and it's obvious that it's personal. It's not even political or issue oriented. Then it just creates chaos, and that's exactly what happened.
Great.
So, but the other piece that that I wanted to talk to you about, and speaking of chaos, is you wrote a little article that appeared in the All Israel News.
That's All Israel News.
Yeah, the All Israel News, which was incredibly hard-hitting, incredibly truthful. It was entitled "The Historical and Biblical Knowledge Should Bring Moral Clarity to Israel's War Against Hamas." And you went through an entire history lesson as to what has constituted the land of Israel, or the land, quote unquote, as secularists like to call Palestine, and went into some of your own personal history as well, which was, I never get tired of reading or hearing about that history, because it's important both to the founding of Israel and also to the friendship that we share. But then you go into quoting Messianic Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, which there's Christians and Jews who have issues with him. But personally, I've grown to really be attracted to some of his understanding of biblical truth and how it connects to our current state of affairs. And so it was a great article, and I thought it was really gutsy.
Thank you. Jonathan is an interesting guy. I've met him a few times. He's very bright. My wife Contessa is friendly with his wife Renata. They know each other a little bit. And he's written a lot, and he's written a lot of controversial things. The first thing I ever read of his was The Harbinger, which was a fascinating, way to describe the events leading up to 9/11. And it was an attempt to explain in spiritual terms and in prophetic terms what happened on 9/11. And some of the dots he's able to connect in that book. First of all, it's a very entertaining read, the way he did it, through a series of conversations with someone who appears to be a prophet. It's highly entertaining, but some of the dots he connects, they're just uncanny. And he does have this gift to see what's happening in the bigger picture and sort of put into context what's happening in real time, in the context of what's happening on a much more global level and spiritual level. And he's got a real gift for that. But the reason I quoted him in the article is because I think the quote that I attributed to him is, I think, the single best explanation that I've ever heard for anti-Semitism. And if we take anti-Semitism to mean simply the blind desire to eliminate or kill Jews at its most extreme form, where does that come from?
Yeah.
And Jonathan said once in a speech I heard him make that in every generation, the enemy of God, i.e. Satan, has always inspired a group of people into being so deceived as to believe that they will be doing God a favor if they try to eliminate the Jewish people.
Yeah.
He contends that began literally at the beginning of time, when God created the heavens and the earth, and can be seen in every generation through Noah, and then post Noah, and then again, and then in Abraham's day on. And his contention is that Satan is at war with God, and that if he can kill off the Jewish people, if he can convince a group of deceived humans to kill off the Jewish people, then he can prove that God is not faithful to his promises, the promises he made to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then I'm pretty sure in the same speech he added a second clause, which was, and he doesn't like Christians much better because Christians have been grafted into those same promises. And so if you dissect that quote, then you'll see a spiritual explanation for a phenomenon that can't otherwise be explained. You cannot come up with a good enough reason why there always seems to be a group of people intent on obliterating the Jewish people off the face of the earth. Why is that? It can't just be because, they're influential in the banking system. It can't just be because they're influential in media. Those two things have not always been the case, first of all. And yet we've always had this element of humanity that's wanted to kill the Jews. And it came to a head in Nazi Germany. We see it clearly in ISIS and Hamas and other groups of jihadist Muslims, and it's inexplicable in any other way. To me, there's no other explanation for it other than there's a spiritual demonic force at work, because these people are blinded into thinking they're doing something good, and the only way you can be that blind into thinking you're doing something good when you're actually doing something terribly evil is because there's a spiritual element at work.
Well, I mean, it's a perspective that you don't hear much within, the political and historical thinking behind the conflict that exists between Arabs and Jews in the Middle East. No one wants to talk about the spiritual, biblical, historical significance of, what happened with Abraham. And so that's why I thought your article was so great. And so hard hitting, because you go there and you talk about that piece of it. And why do you think that nobody wants to talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure I've even really thought about the right answer to that, but you're right to observe it. And I'm not trying. I didn't sit down and say, let me write a hard hitting piece. That wasn't my intent. I was just trying to shed light and truth on this difficult subject, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in this country, especially among young people, et cetera, and other just good-hearted people. Like good-hearted people, we tend to, and young people especially. Pastor Gary Hamrick, who is the senior pastor of Cornerstone Chapel here in Leesburg, Virginia, he spoke about this 2 weeks ago in his sermon. He said, young people, they have a good heart and they want to root for the underdog. And they've been convinced somehow that the Palestinians are the underdog here. And I even try to bring that into question. Who's really the underdog? Palestinian Arabs, certainly some of them were pushed off of land when Israel declared statehood in 1948. And something ought to be done about that. My personal way of dealing with it is I'm very apologetic when I meet Palestinian Arabs, and one of the first things I say is, "I'm sorry that my people pushed you off the land." It's not as though my daughter pointed this out to me yesterday. It's not as though the United States has a clean record on that itself. Yeah. We pushed people off of land because we wanted to. In this case, in America's case, claim it. In Israel's case, reclaim it. And my grandmother told me stories that when Jews were arriving in the land in the early 1920s and 30s even, the Arabs' attitude towards them was welcome back. In other words, we're aware that you used to be here a long time ago, or at least there were more of you a long time ago, and you're returning back to your home, and welcome back. And they would often help with supplies and water and things like this. And so it's a very mixed history, right? A lot of land changed hands in the 1930s and 40s because Jews were arriving and they started purchasing land. And some of the Arabs were like, why would they even want this? This is a wasteland. And then we can't ignore the fact, because it is historically factual, that some people whose families had been on parts of the land for more than a generation or two or three even, were pushed off of their land. And we can't, if we ignore that, then we'll never resolve the problem. And so you have young people who feel empathetic about that, and they forget about the bigger picture. That the Jews are the group of people who have been terrorized and pursued since they became a people, and it was only at the end of the most grandiose effort to drive them into an extinction, meaning the Holocaust in World War II, that they finally realized we need what Theodore Herzl had been saying since the turn of the century, the turn of the 19th century. We need our own land. We need a safe place to be, because this being spread out among the nations isn't working very well for us. And that's exactly what Herzl had written about in 1896. It took the Holocaust for most Jews to be convinced that he was right. And so after the Holocaust, those Jews who survived World War II and survived the concentration camp started showing up in the land in droves after 1945. And when Israel declared statehood in 1948, they did take over lands that had been occupied for at least a couple of 3 or 4 generations by Palestinian Arabs. But the truth is, there are 22 Arab nations around Israel. If you look at a map, Israel is this tiny little sliver, and there's this huge, vast area of land that's controlled by Arab nations. And so that's where we get a little bit into this false narrative, and young people end up being manipulated, I think, unwittingly. They carry a free Palestine sign, and what they think they're saying is, I feel bad for the family that got pushed off their land in 1948, but they're being manipulated into condoning horrific, barbaric acts by Hamas. Yeah. And if you asked your average Harvard student, do you like the idea of killing babies and cutting off their heads and raping women and taking hostage innocent civilians? Of course they would say no. But in the context of this, odd circumstance and set of complications involving Israel and Arabs who lived there prior to Israel declaring statehood, they get very confuzzled, very confused, and they want to side with the underdog. And they think the underdog is the Arabs, and the truth is, it's the Jews who are the underdog. It's the Jews who have been pursued in every generation since the beginning of time.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing what you're saying about them being blinded by, the current construct of our body politic and social media and everything else. But let's not discount those within those groups, those pro-Palestinian groups on college campuses who are calling for the elimination and eradication of the Jewish people. We are seeing that. And they're being open. Like Ben Shapiro likes to say, they're saying the quiet part out loud more and more and more. And the results of that over the last several weeks has just been frightening.
Yeah, that's the scary part. And I think, again, to use my daughter as an example, she put something on her social media that was very balanced. It said something about.
Oh, I saw it and I reacted to it. Okay. I'm going to repost it. It's fantastic.
She said something. It was something I don't think she wrote it. I think she found it somewhere else. But she reposted something that was, recognizing the situation of Palestinian Arabs who have been pushed off their land, but saying, look, you can be concerned about that issue and also not be excited about babies being burned and women being raped and all the things that happened on October 7th. And most of the feedback, I think, was supportive of what she said, but she had a few people DMing her and, being very hateful.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, did you even read what I wrote? Did you see that what I wrote was very balanced? Why can't we both be concerned about that issue and try to find a resolution to it and not support outrageous behavior by Hamas? And his response was, Hitler didn't finish the job, and he should have. Very offensive for her, very eye-opening for her. She's never been around people who have been blatantly open about their hatred of the Jewish people. And that's when that first happens to you as a Jewish person, it is a little jolting.
Yeah. Yeah. She posted that, and she, on the post, it says, please scroll. And then she posted the response of that individual who said that Hitler didn't finish the job. And the characterization of Hamas as anything but a genocidal Nazi terrorist organization is one of the most outrageous things we're seeing. And sort of like this moral equivalence that everyone's trying to, especially politicians and the squad and everything else, they're trying to create this moral equivalence between what Israel does and what Hamas does, which is outrageous. You know, Israel left Gaza, 2007, 2006?
2005.
Yeah, and it's been a terrorist wasteland since.
We've been supplying them with free electricity, free water, and free gas ever since then. And we just said, okay, you want the land, take it over, make something good out of it. And instead of making worthwhile investments in infrastructure and education and creating enterprise opportunities, they wasted it all on buying rockets and machine guns and grenades and building tunnels so they can terrorize Israelis across the border. It's craziness what has happened there. And as I write in my article, the Palestinian people, the Arabs who live in Gaza, they're as much victims as anybody else. Now, I've heard other people say, well, they elected Hamas. Well, how fair was that election? They elected Fatah.
When you have an election under the barrel of a gun.
Thank you. So my understanding is they elected Fatah first, which was more moderate and probably could have maybe done a deal with Israel. Don't forget that Yasser Arafat himself started off as a terrorist and then transitioned the PLO into the Palestinian Authority. And then towards the end of his life was negotiating across the table from Yitzhak Rabin in Oslo, trying to do a land for peace kind of deal. And that didn't cost Yasser Arafat his life. It cost Yitzhak Rabin his life.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't an Islamic terrorist jihadist who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. It was an Orthodox Jew who felt he was going back on what the scripture provided the people of Israel in the Bible, and that he was getting ahead of God and ahead of the Israeli people, and that was the motivation behind his assassination. But my point is that Arabs living in Gaza and even the Arabs living in the Palestinian Authority, they're victims too, and they're victims of a horrible manipulation. Their governments are corrupt. They steal the money that comes from Europe and the United States, and the top leadership lives lavish lifestyles while spending most of the other money that's left over on weapons instead of building infrastructure and a good life for the people living there. And so we did a poll on this, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago now, maybe less, maybe it's not quite that old, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And if you ask the average Arab in the West Bank, would they like to have a chance to move to another Arab country to start a life and actually have a job and care for their kids? The answer overwhelmingly is yes. They would like to go somewhere where they can live a quote normal life, and they're not being afforded that in the West Bank, and they're not being afforded that in Gaza.
Yeah. So, what do you think of all this aid we continue to want to pump into Gaza under the guise of humanitarian assistance, when we know that none of it's going to get to the people? It's like we're playing the same. I mean, this administration especially, and is playing the same sort of feel good. We're gonna try to make things right with Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and we're going to try to control the response of Israel.
You can't negotiate with someone who wants you dead. Yeah. Well, the mayor said that very eloquently, and she's probably right about that. So I don't support giving aid to Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Hezbollah. And we are effectively doing that when we give aid to Iran, and then they fund those groups.
Yes.
I have no problem with us sending in buses of food and water and other supplies into the southern part of Gaza as we anticipate a potential ground invasion of the northern part of Gaza. One of the things the IDF is famous for, the Israeli Defense Forces, is for notifying civilians when they're about to plan some sort of action against the militants. And so they'll drop leaflets in Arabic saying, we believe this building is housing rockets in the basement, and Hamas is notorious for doing that in the basement of schools or hospitals. And so Israel, before it takes any action, will often drop leaflets in Arabic saying, we believe there's rockets underneath this building. We advise you to leave as soon as possible because within such and such period of time, this building is going to be attacked. And what I've heard and read, I've never seen it firsthand, but I've read about this, is that Hamas won't let those people leave. They'll end up with a bullet in their back if they leave. So that's where we get this concept that Hamas and these other terrorist organizations use their own people as human shields. They literally do that. They literally say, we will shoot you if you leave. And so my understanding is Israel is trying to tell the people in Gaza City and elsewhere, start heading south because we're going to start in the north. And we don't want innocent civilians to be killed and there to be collateral damage, which is, by the way, exactly the opposite of the actions by Hamas, which were purposefully targeting innocent civilians, children, girls, teenagers, retired people. I mean, they were completely indiscriminate about who they tortured and killed or took hostage. And that's the antithesis of the way Israel tries to conduct what it feels it needs to do. And one of the things it feels it needs to do is get those hostages back.
Yeah.
And there's no doing that without going in there and looking for them and going door to door. And it's going to get very ugly, very bloody, not just for Arabs living in that region, which is why I hope they head south, but also for a lot of the IDF soldiers. And so supplies and food and water being sent to the south of Gaza to anticipate that influx of people, I support that 100%. More money going to Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to give retirement packages to suicide bombers. Not
or $6 billion in funds to Iran.
Not for that either.
Yeah, that was the match really in all this, and unfortunately, the type of naive foreign policy that this administration has been operating under ever since they tried to unsuccessfully leave Afghanistan. It's been just one thing after another, comedy of errors. And now they're seeing the fruits of that. They're seeing something that could, if it gets out of control, lead to a world war. In very
one of the things that I saw on social media that lifted my spirits for, I don't know, maybe a good 4 minutes was a video I saw of Iranian expats in France marching in favor of Israel, marching in support of Israel. And so it makes you wonder what percent of the Iranian people support the clerical totalitarian regime that's in place there. I suspect it's not high.
No.
And
the difference is Iranians are very well educated. They have a broader understanding of the world, but they live under an oppressive regime.
Right. And so, is it fewer than 50% of the Iranian population that is on board with the clerical totalitarian regime in Iran? If so, I hope. I'm not saying the United States should be involved in regime change, but I would love to see regime change happen internally. There was regime change in 1978 because these Muslim clerics inspired young people, again, well-intentioned young people who thought they were doing something for Allah and for Islam that overthrew the government of the Shah and kept our diplomats hostage for, I think, 400 and some days in our embassy in Tehran. I'd love to see another uprising among the Iranian people that overthrows the clerical totalitarianist government that is running things there now.
Well, on every turn with this administration and the Biden administration, excuse me, and the Obama administration, we've kind of turned our backs on Iran and their people.
Well,
specifically.
I mean, I've had Democratic friends try to explain the rationale to me, and they think the clerics, I don't know. I've never understood it, honestly, but I think, listen, one of the things I learned from one of my mentors in Washington, I think I've talked to you about this before, Jim Wooton, the late Jim Wooton,
Sure.
who was a great attorney and worked in the Reagan Justice Department and founded the Institute for Legal Reform at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is when you're trying to get to an outcome on a policy matter, you have to assume the other side has a point. Yeah. And then try to find a way to accommodate that point without doing violence to your goals and objectives. So when I hear a Democratic policymaker explain their rationale for trying to delay Iran's development of a nuclear weapon by paying them, I assume they honestly believe that's possible. Now, I'm not sure it is. And it's not the route that I would take.
When the rest of us are saying you're being played for a fool, we're being played for fools if we believe that.
Yeah, and if I say that to my Democratic friends, they'll get their feelings hurt. And my goal isn't to go around hurting people's feelings, but it's not the direction I would take.
Sure.
But I don't presume bad motives. I presume good motives. I just don't think it's well thought out, and it's not the way I would advise going.
But it's also stems from just a different worldview, and I guess our worldview within the Judeo-Christian tradition, and we touched on it at the beginning, is that evil exists.
Right.
There is evil in the world. What Hamas came to Israel to do and did was the embodiment of evil.
Right.
And to actually hear the president finally use those words, because those are absolute terms. Good, evil. And where do those come from? Well, those are spiritual terms.
That's right.
God is the ultimate good, and the enemy, or Satan, is the ultimate evil. So to put this into spiritual context is the clearest way of looking at this conflict. Again,
Chris, that's how I see it, and that's why I wrote the article the way I did.
Yeah. It's a brilliant article. If anyone wants to go read it, it's on allisraelnews.com. It was published about a week ago. We put it up on our LinkedIn page, and it's a great article that gives real historical and biblical context to the conflict that has existed in the land and in the region for centuries, for thousands of years. And it's because of the acts of one man named Abraham, and the jealousies and the hurt and the pain that caused over several centuries. But and the spirit, and this is a spiritual war, and we are involved.
Can I tell you one fun anecdote, Chris?
Sure.
I was at the National Prayer Breakfast 2, 3, 4 years ago. And a friend of mine said, "I want you to meet a Palestinian Arab who used to be a sniper for Arafat, but now he's a Zionist because he became a believer in Jesus." And I thought, wow, I'm looking forward to meeting this guy. And I met him. I was introduced to him at the hotel. And I don't know what came over me, but I started to tear up. Very bizarre experience. And I hugged him and I said, "I'm sorry that my people hurt your people." And we're both standing there embracing with tears flowing down our cheeks. And he says, "I'm sorry for the way," I can't remember what he said, whether it was the way we responded or whether it was, probably that, I suspect. And we just hugged each other. And that guy's name is Tass Sada, S-A-D-A. He's
Hmm.
written a book called Once an Arafat Man.
Oh, wow.
And he tells the story of being brought up in the ideology of, of fundamentalist Islam that hates Jews and anything to do with Israel, and how he has this epiphany in his life and completely changes his mind about all of those things. It's similar to that other book I read by I can't remember the author's name now, but it's entitled Son of Hamas.
Mm.
And that's another book that's worth reading, where this guy was literally brought up in the home of one of the imams that was most influential in establishing Hamas. And he starts out as a fighter in Hamas. And when he sees the corruption and the torture of Arabs on their own people while serving out sentences in Israeli prisons, he's just disgusted by the whole thing. And he ends up being invited when he's released out of prison to a Bible study, a New Testament Bible study at the YMCA in Jerusalem, which is a place that I like to stay because it's a great location near the Jaffa Gate, and you can't beat the price.
Yeah, I know where it is.
It's across from the King David Hotel. If you want to live large, you stay at King David.
Well, you go to the King David just for other things.
Yeah, and if I'm with one of my kids and we're just trying to go on the cheap, we stay at the Y.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he had the same kind of epiphany, and now he's pro-Israel and a Zionist. And can we talk for a moment about the word Zionism, because that seems to be a dirty word these days. You got to understand when Arabs, not Arabs, when people who hate the Jews say they're anti-Zionist, at some point we got to start taking these people at their word. What they mean is they don't just hate the concept of Israel, they hate the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Okay, the whole concept for Zionism is simply this: the Jews need a safe place to go because they're not well liked around the world. That's all Zionism is. And what people don't seem to remember, but I mentioned it, I think, in the article, is when Zionism was first being developed, the concept behind it by Theodor Herzl in the late 1800s, they asked for a homeland for the Jewish people, and they didn't ask for Palestine first. They asked for Uganda.
Yeah. And
because they weren't too worried about where they needed to be. They just knew they needed a safe place that they could call their own. And the British government said, no, you can't have Uganda. And then a couple of years later issued the Balfour Declaration, which says that the Jewish people should be returned to their homeland in Israel. And so when somebody says they don't support Zionism to a Jew, I'm just telling you this. My Christian friends have got to learn this. When a person says, I'm against Zionism, to a Jew, it feels like you're saying, oh, so I shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think most Christians mean that when they say, I'm not for Zionism. What they mean is, I'm against Arabs who have lived in that land or near that land who are abused by the Israeli government in any way, shape, or form. Fine, I'm against that too. But that's not anti-Zionism. That's anti-abuse by military or police, Israeli police or military forces in the West Bank or any part of the land. But when you say you're anti-Zionism, it's as if you're saying, I don't think there should be a safe place for the Jews to live.
Yeah.
And that's painful to hear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you did touch on one thing that's also controversial in some circles, and that is, and you're hearing more and more of this from the Messianic community, and also from those from several Muslim clerics as well, that the answer to all of this is Jesus, and that if more Muslims and if the veil were truly lifted, and Jesus was seen for who he was and who he said he was, then this would not be a conflict. The conflict would end. And until that happens, the conflict will continue.
I think that fortunately and unfortunately, I think that's true. Fortunately, in the sense that I believe it's going to happen, because it's clear from Scripture that there is going to be a Messiah. And if you read the New Testament, you can become aware of the notion that he's been here once already, and when he comes, it'll be his second trip, not his first. Hence your referral to the veil being lifted off the eyes of the children of Israel, and then the scales coming off of deceit, coming off the eyes of Ishmael, coming off the eyes of the Arab world and the Muslims. I should clarify. There's a big chunk of the Arab world that is Christian already, but people who grew up in Islam don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah per se. They recognize him as a prophet. But if they submit themselves to Jesus and receive his sacrifice on the cross as their redemption, and the Jewish people do that again, also do that at some point, then yes, we will have real shalom in not just the Middle East and in Israel, but all over the world.
Yep. We will have peace in Jerusalem. That's what we pray for. Well, John, JD, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate your time. And we could probably go on and on, but my producer is giving me like the big hook. Start spinning her finger. But no, Robin's great. But yeah, it's all of this is intertwined, and I would just really encourage people to go out and read John's article, research Jonathan Cahn. What we find in our world today is a spiritual war, not just a war of, rulers and principalities, much, much deeper. And we need to pray for everyone involved. So thanks, JD.
Thank you, Chris. Honored to be on with you guys again, and blessings on you and on the good work you do here.
Yeah. Well, God bless and take care. Thanks for listening.